Okay, yes. Part 4. Let's go. The Dark Horse one-shots. So back when Dark Horse had the license to print Serenity comics, they presented 5 short comics for various reasons, and we're going to discuss those today and how they fit into the larger Firefly timeline. So those 5 comics we're going to be talking about are The Other Half, Float Out, Downtime, It's Never Easy, and The Warrior and the Wind. So up first, The Other Half. So this came out back in 2008, and this will really feel like a lifetime ago. This was first published on MySpace, Dark Horse Presents, which was kind of as it sounds, Dark Horse presenting a few fairly short comics. I think this one was just sort of 8 pages, and for whatever reason they decided to publish these first on MySpace. Quick summary story-wise, the crew are trying to transport this Alliance officer, and they're being chased by Reavers. Its position in timeline, I think it's quite straightforward. I think The Other Half takes place after everything else but before the film. I say that because in this story, Inara, Book are not present, but everyone else is. Now you might say, well, they just happen not to be present on this job. That's true, but I think also the presence of the Reavers kind of means that thematically it's appropriate that this story is close to the film, because this is the only Firefly story other than the film in which Reavers actually take to the stage. So that's why I think it kind of makes sense thematically that it be near the end of the timeline, near the movie. So next up, Float Out, which was written by Patton Oswalt and was just a straight one-shot in 2010. I remember this one really vividly when it came out because I just happened to be in a comic book shop, which isn't really a regular occurrence for me. I think I must have been buying a gift for a friend or something, and I just happened to look across the store and see it sitting on the shelf, and I was like, oh my god, a Serenity comic that I had no idea was coming out. So instantly bought it, and then I spent the entire bus ride home worrying that this was a series of comics that I'd completely missed. Then it turned out I just was very lucky that I was in that shop on the right week. If you recognise the name of the author, Patton Oswalt, it's because you probably recognise his face as well. It's this guy that you see in almost every TV show. And apparently the story is that he was working with Joss Whedon on Dollhouse. I think he's a recurring character for a few episodes at least on Dollhouse. And he asked Joss Whedon if he could write a Serenity comic. And I guess Joss was like, yeah, sure. And I think that it worked out for Dark Horse because there was an unintended gap in the Buffy season 8 series at the time. So they kind of shoved this one in to kind of fill that gap instead. The story itself is kind of tangential to Firefly, to be honest. The idea is that these 3 characters who you've not met before, but who have all worked with Wash at some point in the past, kind of get together to kind of toast their old friend who has been killed in the movie, and they're sort of agreed to start working together, and they've bought themselves a new ship which happens to be a Firefly Mark IV, and they name it the Jet Wash in honor of Wash. It's probably, to be honest, the weakest Serenity comic, purely because it doesn't really contain all that much of characters that you actually know. There's flashbacks of Wash, but not really anything else. It's an interesting, fun, maybe risky little piece, but it's not the jewel in the crown of Serenity, if I'm honest. Float Out very simply goes after Serenity before Leaves on the Wind. Now, Downtime. No. Downtime, we're not going to talk about that. It's Never Easy. Okay, so It's Never Easy was a free comic book day comic from 2012, written by Zach Whedon, who also did Leaves on the Wind and The Shepherd's Tale. And it's a short vignette about this kind of chappie who pretends to be a passenger and then tries to steal Serenity from Mal. It's Never Easy is a post-film comic for sure. The question really is it before or after Floatout? And I think it's before Floatout on the basis that in It's Never Easy, Jane is clearly present. And we know from Leaves in the Wind that Jane hasn't been on the ship for at least a little while in that story. And anyone that's read Floatout will agree that Floatout takes place very soon before Leaves in the Wind. So for that reason, It's Never Easy is certainly before Floatout. Next up, The Warrior and the Wind. This was a free comic book day comic from 2016. It was written by Chris Robertson, who is the author of No Power in the Verse as well. I can't really say too much about it for fear of spoilers, but let's say that it's probably the most eccentric of any Firefly story. It's kind of told as a bit of like a bedtime story slash Disney cartoon type style, like the Firefly crew are somewhat sort of reimagined as these kind of like more exotic type characters. It's a very cute little story, and it takes place very neatly between Leaves on the Wind and No Power in the Verse. Okay, yes, downtime. Right, fine. Right, like the thing about downtime is that it's a real nightmare for Firefly timeline enthusiasts like me. It's got a handful of things that could be interpreted as clues as to where it fits in the timeline, but nothing that's really definitive. I think the best that we can say with any real confidence is that it happens during the run of the show and toward the tail end. But as to which episodes specifically it takes place between, that's a bit more up for debate. Personally, I like to think of it as taking place after The Message and before Big Damn Hero, but I'm very happy to hear people disagree with me. I'm not 100% convinced of that positioning myself. I could make a whole 10-15 minute video discussing all the little clues and getting very sort of nitpicky and what if, how about, but I'm not so sure that many people want to listen to that. So for now, we're going to leave downtime after The Message, before Big Damn Hero. And moving on, we've now finished the timeline. All the comics and all the novels placed in order, but there's actually a few entries missing. So there are some short stories that are generally considered canon because they were written by some of the original writers of the TV show. And we will discuss those 3 or 4 stories in my next video. So please check that one out in a week's time. Thank you and goodbye.